I'm Sam Marshall. I'm the owner of Clearbox Consulting, and thank you all for joining this webinar. If you don't know Clearbox, we're based in the UK and Ireland, so we have a lot of clients across the European Union. And we focus on the people side of technology. So if you're struggling to get to grips with the digital workplace strategy, maybe you've rolled out the technology, but you're not seeing the changing behaviors that you hoped for, or you just feel that there's so many choices that you might be making, you don't know where to start, then come to us. We work with organizations from small charities through to multinationals with hundreds of thousands of employees, helping them to make sense and put together coherent roadmaps for what they're going to do. One of the things that we also offer are 1-day and 2-day workshops. And we come to you, we deliver these in-house, or we can even do it virtually for most of them as well over a series of shorter sessions. And these, again, typically look at the people side of technology. So we do, for example, SharePoint for internal communicators, Office 365 for business leaders. And rather than just talking about technology features, we focus on the why part. We try to explain why an organization should want to use these tools and show real world examples of how other organizations are applying them to problems that you would identify with. They're interactive, you know, there's lots of time for discussion and exercises as well. And one of the reasons why we're doing this planner webinar is just to give you a taste of that kind of approach. So I'm hoping as I talk about planner, you'll be inspired with some ideas, because I'll be talking about some actual scenarios rather than just clicking buttons and telling you what each button does. Before we get into the webinar proper, I just want to get a sense of how much you listeners have used Planner before. So you're going to see a poll pop up in a moment. And the question poll is, how much experience do you have with Planner? So if you've just seen it, not really used it, or have you played with it and maybe set up an experimental plan but not used it in anger? Or have you set up maybe 1 or 2 real plans that you've used with colleagues? And if you're using it regularly, maybe you've got 3 or 4 active plans underway. So I'll just give you another few seconds to get your votes in there.
Great, 3/4 of people have responded, so I'm going to end the poll now.
Thank you. Proof that people are alive out there, Wedge. That's great. Okay, so I guess we've got about half who've seen it or just played with it, which for a 101 session is exactly what I'd expect. But we've also got some pros out there using it regularly. I do hope I'll give you a few more tips that perhaps you haven't stumbled across yet. What I would say is that please just bear with us slightly, because I want to spend perhaps 10 minutes talking about some of the planner basics, and then I'll move on to some of those use cases. So the format of the session is that I'll do a bunch of use cases, then I'll talk about some principles for how you should set up your plans, a few more use cases, and then talk about some integrations with things like Flow, and conclude with some limitations and frustrations, and then time for questions. Wait, I'm still seeing the poll results. I don't know if you are, and if you want to try and get rid of them, can we do that?
I am not seeing them. I'm so sorry. Let me see what I can do to get rid of them.
Maybe I'm seeing them just for me then. Let me go back to arrow and I will get rid of that myself. Yeah, there we go. We're good to go. The laser pointer again. So Planner, you know, everybody's talking about Teams at the moment. Teams a cute puppy that everybody wants to adopt. Planner's more like the white lab rat that has kind of slipped in there, but nobody has really given it a lot of attention so far. It's a bit of an underdog, and I think that's a shame, because it's a great tool. We use it for some serious work at Clearbox, and it has a lot going for it. Now, if you're signed in and then your boss calls you into a meeting, just memorize these 5 things about Planner, and you can bluff having sat through the whole webinar. So the first thing to know is that it's based on the Kanban board concept. Kanban boards originated at Toyota in Japan in about the 1950s. And the idea of the Kanban board was that it was a way for workers to not take on too much at once. So you can see here in this Kanban board, we've got columns for to do, doing, and done. And if there's too much in the doing column, if there's too much work underway, Toyota said that the workers were entitled to say to management, no, we can't take anything else. It's got to sit in to do. We're not going to activate that work task. And by doing it in a very visual way, it's easy to get an eyeball sense of the workload. The second thing about Planner is it's great when tasks are not interdependent. And what I mean by that is that each card, each task can represent pretty much everything that you need to know about it. There's no kind of knock-on flow. It's free, as in if you've got Office 365, there are no additional costs. Everybody with an Office 365 license can start using Planner. It relies a lot on Office 365 groups, which has implications both good and bad that I'm going to come on to. And you can expect to see more investment and more interest in Planner because Microsoft at Ignite late last year announced a vision for unified tasks. And Planner is one of the ways, along with things like To Do, where tasks are going to originate. Here's how it looks if you've not seen it before. Now you might see this and think, haven't I seen that before somewhere? And the answer is probably, because it's a pretty blatant rip-off of the market leader, Trello, which is also a digital Kanban board tool. However, there's nothing particularly wrong with that. Trello itself wasn't the first Kanban board tool, so I think it's fine that Microsoft takes, I'm doing little quote marks, inspiration from other software that takes off. And what's nice is that Planner is much more closely integrated with Office 365 than Trello is, so there's some big benefits that come from that. A little bit of the terminology. So here's that Planner board again. At the top, you can see we have columns, or as Microsoft calls them for reasons which aren't clear to me, buckets. So new tickets, picked up, in progress. These are all buckets. Each one of these boxes is a task card. And on that card, you can have things like due date, as you can see. If you attach a picture or a document, then it often gives you a thumbnail like this for a picture, or over here, a preview of the document. In the bottom left-hand corner of the cards, you get a priority indicator saying urgent or important. You can also have a due date, and it'll go red when things are past that due date. The little circle is a progress indicator. It's just 3 states, so it'll be empty for not started, half a circle for in progress, and a full blue circle for when it's complete. And you can see the names of people that the task has been assigned to, such as Adam and Darren here. So the card is the basic structure. And here's how a card looks. When you click Add Task, you get a form to fill in to create a new card. And you can assign them to people. Recently, it became possible to assign it to multiple people, so that's quite handy if, for example, there might be 2 or 3 people that need to work on it. And the whole idea, like the Kanban board, is to show progress visually by moving the cards between buckets. But what I'm going to come on to show is that the buckets don't always have to represent progress, depending on what you want your board to help you do. When you click on the card, you get this more detailed view that you can see here. So probably one of the main things you're going to do is add comments and have a discussion about the card. And this is good because it keeps the conversation in context. One of the frustrations compared to Trello is that Planner's not great at telling you when comments have been added. So my first tip for you is that when someone assigns a task to you, if I was Adam here, put a comment in of OK, because once you've added a comment, you'll start getting personal emails to you whenever a comment is added. Otherwise, because Planner's part of a group, then comments would go in the group mailbox. And I don't know about you, but I never really tend to look at group mailboxes because they're too generic. Here, when you click on attachment, you can add the files like that car preview that you saw of the JPEG file. One of the things that I said earlier about Planner being integrated with Office 365 is that all these files are stored in SharePoint. So unlike using something like Trello, where you probably create a duplicate of the file, here, if your plan is associated with a SharePoint site already, or with a Microsoft Teams, then what you're doing is just, in effect, linking to a file that already exists, and you keep one copy, which I think is really handy for avoiding confusion about versions, for example. You can have up to six, but only 6 labels up here, which you can name as you want to have like an extra level of meaning. And I would recommend using labels for things that don't change as a card changes state. So for example, if this task involves non-hazardous materials, it's always going to involve non-hazardous materials, no matter what state of progress it's in. And lastly, you can add a checklist here. So if your task has got lots of multiple fine-grained steps, you can define the checklist within the card too. So there's the kind of the basic principles. Let me switch over to a live planner board so you can see a little bit more about how it works. So this is me in Chrome. Here's the facilities issues management board again. So remember the buckets, these are the buckets and these are the cards. And I can simply click on a card and drag it over into another column. And what's nice is you can see that as I'm moving around, things are moving. So it's quite a tactile experience. It's not like using an Excel spreadsheet where you can't really visually see what's going on. And I think that's one of the great things about this Kanban concept. Over on the left, you can see that I've favorited other plans. So this is the facilities one. Here's another one for meetings. Here's another one for reaction cards. So it's quite easy to move between those. Over here, it also tries to help out by showing recent plans, so like new bicycle shed project. If I click on that little star, then it becomes one of the ones in the favorites list as well, if I've got a lot to work on. So let's open up one of those cards. You can see here, it's given me a thumbnail of that added attachment. In progress is a thing that says I've started it or it's completed. Priority is the thing that puts like the little red bell or exclamation mark in the bottom left-hand side. So far, so good. Now, one of the things that Planner does quite well compared to other Kanban board tools available is that you can filter things very easily and you can group things very easily. So let's say, for example, I only want to see things which are due in the next week. That's not a great example, is it? Or this week, then it will just fine tune the view on those slides there. Let's clear the filter. What I can also do instead is group by bucket. So I can see, for example, a column view which is grouped by person according to who it's assigned to. And this is really handy for making sure that, for example, you're allocating tasks evenly across the team. There's also another couple of tools that are quite handy. So one is the charts view. And the charts view is more like a project management dashboard where, for example, you can see how many urgent tasks you got in. You can see if a lot of new tickets are coming in or ones are stalled. And you can also very quickly see the workload. So here we can see that Adam has got 3 tasks and he hasn't started them. So you probably want to avoid giving a new task to Adam. Fiona is late with one. And what's handy on this members view is that if I click on Fiona, then it's filtered by Fiona. You can even see up here that the filter has changed so that Fiona's ticked. And over here, these cards are also filtered to the ones that Fiona's got. So it's quite a useful way of saying, what is it that Fiona's late on? Is this malfunctioning security door? I'm going to just reset and clear that filter again. The last view is a schedule, which is more of a calendar view. You can do per week and per month. So you might use this, for example, if you've got tasks coming up which are already scheduled in, like this IT department move to the basement. I can see that this is quite a long, expected to be quite an enduring task. So it's important to know, for example, how many other cards we could move into the active column, bearing in mind that this is going to be coming up. Okay, so there's the basics. I'll come back to another demo in a moment. Where do you find Planner? Well, I actually find probably one of the quickest things to do is just to type in tasks.office.com in a browser, and it will take you straight into your Planner dashboard view. But you can also, for example, go through Office 365. So here on the quick navigation menu, the waffle, as it's sometimes called, you'll see Planner. If you don't see Planner, go on All Apps, and then you'll be able to add it to your preferences for the shortlist. You can also go to it through groups or through Teams. So this screenshot is from Teams. I can add a tab with an app, and Planner is one of the apps there, and that will appear as within the team as something I can quickly go to. Again, it makes a lot of sense if you're using a plan with a specific team as an intuitive way to get to it. There's a good range of apps for your smartphone, mobile phones as well. So iOS and Android have both phone and tablet versions. The tablet version works nicely in landscape, so you get more views of your buckets. And of course, with touch screens, it's quite nice to drag and drop cards in a very hands-on way. If you use to do as your task manager, which is this thing over here, then you'll also see tasks from Planner assigned to you within your to-do list. One little gotcha to be mindful of is that for some reason in the iOS app, you can't see if the task is urgent or important. You don't see that little red bell, and you can't change the status of it, whereas you can in to do. So if I've got like this, what is it in the workplace, and I click on the star icon, then that marks it as important both in to do and back in Planner. Just want to spend a moment to differentiate Planner versus other tools. So of course, task management sounds a lot like project management, and the granddaddy of all project management in the Microsoft world is Microsoft Project. It's been around for a long time, characterized by having these Gantt charts showing a waterfall of one task flowing from the next. So when would you use each? Planner's great for smaller projects. Project is great for very large and complex ones. And one of the reasons is that Planner doesn't show dependencies between tasks. You can't say that we've got to do card 1 before we can start card 2 in Planner, whereas in Project, that's absolutely what it does. And if you know that if task 1 slips and task 2 is also going to slip. So that means that milestones can't really be expressed in Planner. If you say we need to do these 10 tasks by a certain date as the interim step, there's no strong way to represent that. In Project, it's quite a significant thing where you can say all 10 tasks flow into this convergence point of, say, for example, end of phase 1. But look, when it comes to resource workload, in Planner, you can do that kind of eyeballing. It's quite an intuitive thing. Whereas in Project, although you might say, Adam's got 3 tasks in my plan, you can't say, Adam's also got 20 tasks in another project, whereas in Microsoft Project, you can do that cross-project resource planning. But Planner's so much easier to use. I don't know about you, but when I've worked on projects with Microsoft Project, the project plan's been kind of like this sacred tome that only the project manager can change. And therefore, it relies on emails or messages from everybody saying to the project manager, please can you update this task because it's now 70% complete. What's lovely about Planner is that each individual can take ownership of the card and progress it and comment on it as they see fit, because it's very intuitive. Project, you know, you go sometimes for months of training to get to grips with the thing. The cost of Planner is bundled into Office 365, whereas Project can be very expensive if you're on the full Project server. To be fair to Microsoft, though, they have launched a new project for the web, which is a much more reasonable monthly cost. Rolling all that up, then typical use case for Planner might be designing a new weather widget. For Project, something like colonizing Mars. What about to do versus Planner? Well, this analogy might work for some of you. Planner is like SharePoint because it's working on collective things, collective tasks. To do is like OneDrive because it's mostly about a personal view and personal tasks. If that doesn't make much sense, don't worry about it. Planner is a thing for team shared plans. Right, so let's have a look at a few use cases. The first one is called editorial pipeline, but it applies to anything that might have a simple review and approval process. So a magazine, planning intranet news, if you've got a website and you're planning stories, or even if you've got a sales pipeline where you might have, for example, an early lead, an active lead, a deal you're about to close, and leads that have gone stale. What we're looking for is a simple process for criteria for moving from one column to another to say that it's changed state. And the charts are quite handy for showing workload if you've got lots of people who might be working on articles at different times. So let me go back into demo mode for that one. So I'm going to click on editorial pipeline here. And I want to go back to the board view. Yeah, well, one of the things, incidentally, about Planner, which is a bit odd, is that whatever view you had for the last board also propagates through to all the other boards. I'm not sure I really like that. So here, in our editorial pipeline scenario, we've got story ideas. So these are not active. One of the things that we're using Plan for here is to say we don't want to lose the idea. So let's have a common place where that idea can be logged whenever it comes up. But also, for example, the next edition of our magazine, we're not going to go forward with every idea that we have. So I'll add a task. Let's say I've got an idea for a new article, which is something like how AI transforms whittling. There you go. So I'll add that as a task. At the moment, it's not assigned to anybody, but let's say the editor loves this idea of how AI transforms whittling. So I'm going to assign it to someone. So the easiest way to do that is to go to a different room, which is assigned to. So I can see that my unassigned stories are here. And looking through, I can see that Fiona is really busy, but Katie isn't. So I'm going to move that across to the Katie test column. And it's therefore, because I've moved it into that column, I've automatically added Katie to it. Let me just show you that again if you missed it. So not assigned to anyone. Katie's column, there we go. It's got Katie on it. If you've got loads of tasks and want to assign them very quickly, it's a lot easier to do that by dragging than it is by opening up the card and then going to assign and then picking a name. Okay, so we've assigned this to Katie. What Katie will do is pick this up, and now she's going to say, all right, I've got this, thank you, it's in progress. I'm going to pretend that Adam's Katie, but we're going to say okay, and remember that means that I'll start getting emails when the discussion happens. And now as an editor, I want to see, right, overall, how are things going? So go to the charts, look at this. First of all, the first thing I can see is that actually we've only got one story in progress. Good on you, Katie. We've got quite a lot of storage running late. So as an editor, probably the next thing I'm going to do is chase up on those stories and say, what's happening, guys? Because we've got to go live with some news stories soon. Okay, let me go back to the board. The next thing I'm going to do is say to Katie, I've got a template I want you to follow. So go to add attachments. And as I said, SharePoint, great way to share documents. In SharePoint, I've already got this article template. So I'm going to save it to there. And I might say, hi, Katie, please use this template. My typing's appalling, so overlook any typos there. So she'll get that message, she'll get a notification. What's really good about this is that as the story moves through different columns, let me come out of that, go back to our book goods view. There we go. As Katie moves her story through, she's going to keep that document attached to it. So in the past, we might, for example, have had folders in a shared document library or SharePoint saying submitted, reviewed, and so on, and we'd have to physically move that Word document into the different folders. Here, the document isn't moving at all, but we're representing it just by moving the card. The last thing maybe to point out, it's a little bit hidden, is that you also have a notebook. You have OneNote attached to the plan. So it could be that we use the notebook as well for some of the editorial discussions. All right, let's go back to the slides. So I want to consolidate that by talking a little bit about some of the design principles we explored there. We've got a story ideas column, which doesn't mean the work's underway. It's not going to look bad if we've got loads of ideas here, but it means that at any point, if we've got an idea for an article, it doesn't get lost. We're using a Kanban board because each card represents an isolated article, so it can progress on its own and it can progress at different rates. So some articles might go very quickly through from picked up to published. Others might get stored for a couple of months. Maybe you're waiting for the availability of someone to interview, and that's fine. It doesn't really affect the process or look bad as it might do on a project plan. We can do a contributor view. So if I was about to have a catch-up call with Katie, it's really easy for me to sort and say, show me the cards that Katie's working on. And the last thing I showed was a document moves with the process. So you don't have to keep worrying about updating links or moving the document for the status of the task to be represented. A variation on this, which I'm not going to demo just to explain, is it's quite handy to use a plan for a standing weekly agenda. So let's say you've got an ongoing project and every Monday you get together and you talk about how things are going on. Rather than have an agenda which gets emailed around, have a column called to discuss for agenda items like this. And again, that principle that any team member can submit things to the agenda item because anybody can create a card works really well. You could even move the cards around before the meeting to prioritize what you're going to talk about. And then as these things are discussed, get allocated into tasks, you can see things that are in process. I don't know about you, but I've worked on quite a few projects where every weekly meeting generates actions, and then those actions don't get carried over from one meeting to the next. Or you might look at last week's agenda and talk about the actions, but if it's still pending, then 2 weeks' time, you've forgotten about that action because it's not a new agenda item. This is a way to make sure that tasks don't get lost, using that principle that things can move at different speed. My next scenario is around issue management. So this is any kind of request type service. So it might be IT tickets, HR help desk, procurement help desk. And it works well when the whole request can be expressed in one card. So there's not, for example, loads of dependencies or related tasks. Our design principles for this one is that we're using a Kanban board so that any member of the facilities team, in this instance, can pick up a task. It's really easy to prioritize tasks and show which ones are urgent, which would be true, for example, of emails coming in because the urgent emails will get pushed down. And often you'd want that simple reporting on status to see, for example, if things have got stalled so that they don't get lost permanently. So let me show you that one in a real board. Here's facilities issues management. So we've got new tickets coming in. So these haven't been assigned to anybody yet. And what we're going to do is allocate them to individual. And this time I'm also going to show how we use the categories, the labels, to help understand things. So we got this one about a malfunctioning security door. It's important, so we need to know we need to attend to it. But we defined the use of a label to say a part is needed. So although it's in progress, Adam the busy chap, he's gone to inspect the door. He says, oh, I need a new latch. So he's added that as a comment. He's flagged it as part needed. And what we're also doing is using the checklist as a way to say that, okay, after my inspection, we need to order that latch and then we need to install it. So the checklist is a good way of noting on the card what needs to happen next once we've got that part. The other handy thing about the labels is that we can group by labels and we can see the part needed column. So imagine we've got 4 or 5 tasks that were stalled because they needed parts and someone said, hey, I'm going to the supply store, does anybody need anything? What they can do is just see what's on this part needed column and get them all at once and save everybody a bit of time. Again, if we go back to grouping by buckets, same sort of thing. Imagine an urgent task comes in. What I might want to do is group by assigned to, and I can immediately see that Katie, although she's writing articles, she's not very good at unblocking toilets. So we're going to assign it to Katie because she's got lots of capacity to do things. So there you go, there's issue management. You might use attachments more. For example, if someone goes to inspect things and takes a photograph, that's quite a good visual way of reminding yourself what each task is about as well. One thing maybe to highlight here, let's go back to group to bucket, is that although we've got a resolved column waiting sign off, we don't actually have a column called completed. And that's because in the Kanban ideal, once it's completed, it should disappear off the board. And what it said Trello there, what Planner actually does is hide things by default. So you can see them if you want to track them, but it should be visually less clutter once things have been done. Let me go back to PowerPoint. There we go. So that was issue management. And there you go. There's the same thing we talked about before. So let's just pause a moment now and talk about some of the principles for setting up a planner. When you want to set up a plan, you can create it from a number of places. So mostly what I've been showing you is what's called a planner hub, that screen where you can move between different plans. But I could also, for example, do it from within the Teams app If I add a plan to the team, then I can start naming that plan and working on it. Same in a SharePoint site, I can say, create new document, create new folder, or create new plan. And of course, in the mobile app, I can do it too. My tip is that you should create the plan wherever the group that applies to it makes most sense to you. So if you're saying this is a plan which is specific to a Microsoft team that already exists and the people should have access to it and the ones who are in that team, then great, I would initiate it from within the team rather than trying to create the plan and then retrospectively applying that view to it. My other tip is that you can set up a plan as a template. So let's say there's something that you do maybe once a month and you want to pre-populate it with a number of cards and a number of tasks. Then you could say, I'm going to copy that plan and create a new instance for something like a monthly team leaders event, or it might be doing the annual accounts, for example, or doing a software upgrade where you want to make sure that you do all the testing steps comprehensively. When you create a plan, it also creates a group unless you're creating it in something that already has a group like a team. The only way to avoid creating a new group with a plan is by assigning it to an existing group. But note, you can have multiple plans per group, so each team could have several plans on it. Now, I'm using this word group quite ominously because it does have a number of implications. So in Office 365, every group has its own Outlook mailbox. So if you create a plan called demo, you'll create an Outlook mailbox called demo@myorganization.com. It'll trigger a calendar. It will create a SharePoint team site. So not Teams, but the old school team site with a document library. And it will create a OneNote notebook. So that's quite a lot of clutter that comes with creating a plan. And that's why I think plans are best created within an existing team area or SharePoint site because they're also got the group. As you can see, if you go to Microsoft's complaints forum, request forum, feedback area, a lot of people would like to be able to create a plan without triggering all this other stuff as well. But unfortunately, at the moment, that's not possible. One of the things that you might wonder about is who can see the plan. So you can have a plan that's visible to everybody, a public one, visible to the whole organization. And there might be reasons why you want to do that. For example, you're showing an idea suggestion board and how those are progressing within an intranet. But mostly you probably want it to be private to the group. And that's not something you change from within the plan, you change it within the group. So you have to go to the group and say, change the settings, so from public to be private. So good practice tips. I said before that the way to use the buckets is for major state changes. So the bucket should be meaningful in terms of managing workload and making it really easy to see, for example, where things should go. And it's good to group by assign to check that people aren't overloaded. And for this, it really helps to have profile photos in there. So you can see, for example, Darren is very easy to spot. Fiona and Katie, because they're both circles with letters in, they stand out somewhat less readily. The labels that we showed in the last example are good for showing attributes that don't change across types, across state changes. And the checklists, rather than having lots and lots of columns, can be handy if you just want to reflect minor steps that might occur across several minor steps that might occur as the task progresses. I said about creating a plan and copying it as a template. You can also create a card and copy that as a template as well. So I might, for example, have an article card and I'll copy that and rename it to trigger a new article idea. You know how I showed dragging and dropping to assign to people? You can also very quickly change priority by doing group by priority and moving the cards between priority columns instead. I once tried to delete a plan and it took me ages to figure it out. So here's how you do it. There's nothing that says delete plan on the board. You have to go to board and plan settings. And then way buried down there on the plan settings is delete this plan. So that's how you get rid of them if you created demo plan number 16. I want to get rid of them all. Let's do a couple more use cases. Shameless plug, one of the things that Clearbox does is a quarterly report called SharePoint Intranets in a Box, in which we review about 50 different products. And as you can imagine, a tool like Planner is really helpful for overseeing that. I can't show you the actual plan, but you can imagine we've got 50 different cheeses that we wanted to review, and we're going to manage that instead. So each card represents a section in the report, like a 16-page review of Edam cheese and mozzarella cheese and so on. We've created a template, so when we initiate a section like Edam, we'd copy this template card, rename it as Edam, and then use the checklist as a way to track progress. Unfortunately, on the card view, we have to choose between the photo or the checklist. You can't do both at once. On the whole, I think that the photos are quite an easy way to check things and keep track of what's going on. So this scenario appeals to us as a solution, where Planner is a good solution, because often what happens is that authors work at different rates, and some tasks go back and forth. So it might be drafted and edited and then back into draft again. Planner's great for that kind of non-linear thing where it might do multiple loops to get things completed. And we can use that checklist to keep track of where things are, and comments to say, for example, I've edited it, but you need to redraft it because this section seems incomplete to me. And of course, using the progress view lets us see very clearly if anything's running late. And it's not that we necessarily want to see a detailed plan of that. We just want to eyeball it and say, it looks like 6 reviews still haven't done their first demonstration. So that's a bit of a worry for us. We want to get onto those, otherwise it's going to slow up the whole process. The second scenario is around virtual workshops. So we like doing face-to-face workshops, of course. You can get the energy there, you can get everybody interacting and doing things with post-it notes and so on. But in the modern times, the reality is that it's really hard to get people to fly together, travel to come together for a whole day workshop. So we started doing things virtually instead, using Microsoft Teams or video conferencing. And we asked ourselves, well, what can we do to replicate some of the good things about post-it notes? And that's where we started using Planner instead. So what you're looking at here, one of the techniques we use, these are called Microsoft Product Reaction Cards. It's a deck of about 100 cards with adjectives on like this. And we might say, okay, we're going to split you up into 2 teams. One team, come up with 8 terms that represent your digital workplace right now. Other team come up with 8 cards that represent how you want your digital workplace to be in future. It's quite a good kind of like team building exercise. So to do that virtually, we replace those physical cards with a planner deck where there's 100 tasks, each one with the adjective in them. And let me just switch actually into the real plan for that. So action cards, you can see. So teams will go into the plan and they'll move the cards around. And what's nice is that other team members can see the card moving. So that's good. You get a sense of things happening. You don't miss changes that are going on. And people can work in parallel. So you might say 2 people work letters A to M and 2 people work on letters N to Z, move things into the definitely out. And then you'll come up with a shorter list of maybe, yeah, here's things that are true about our intranet now, or things that we want to talk about for the intranet in future. And it works really well because if people are using Teams for the workshop anyway, they're already logged in, and all we're saying is go to this tab within the Teams environment and off you go. There's not the kind of the overhead of getting people to switch environments to do this task. There's another benefit as well, which is not so much for this one, but for other workshops where, you might say, give me some examples, and people will write on post-it notes, and you get this appalling scroll because people are, they'll write a word or two in the meeting and it'll make a lot of sense to them. And afterwards you're trying to decipher it. We had one workshop where someone had just written badgers on a post-it note. We're like, badges. Why did they write badges? Clearly, it was very profound to them at the moment. It turned out that what they'd written was actually badges, as in kudos or employee of the month type badges. You don't get that so much when people can actually type on cards. And we find that they actually write a lot more detail because they can type. And what's great in a virtual workshop as well is that you can then add comments. So you can say, oh, Darren, I've written this idea. What do you think? Can you come in and comment on the Trello, on the planner card in order to add your own points of view to it? Okay, back to PowerPoint. Gosh, there we go. So we just show the product reaction cards like that. The last thing I'm going to talk about very briefly is planner integrations. So planner integrates with To-Do. This is a iPad view of To-Do, so I can see assigned to you. So what it's showing is the task name, spillage in lobby, and then the name of the planner board that it comes from. So facilities issue management, this one's coming from Editorial. So this is my personal view on all the tasks that are assigned to me. And again, I think that's great because probably I'll have things that come into my inbox in Outlook and I'll flag those as things that I need to follow up with. I'll have tasks coming from Planner. I might have a personal to-do list as well. And To-Do is give me a single view of all of those so I can decide what is it that I need to act on first and what do I need to accommodate into my day rather than just going to one place and reacting to my email inbox and forgetting all the other tasks that have come in through Planner. Planner integrates nicely with Teams. So when you want to add a plan into an existing team, it'll ask, do you want to create a new plan? Or if you created a plan from outside this team, you can select it from this drop down as well, and it'll post into this channel saying that it's being added. This is Planner operating within an individual team. So here we've got a team called Facilities Issue Management, and you can see the tab with the view of the plan that I demoed earlier. But there's another way in which Planner also appears within Teams, which is that you can add it as an app to the left-hand rail. So it's not on the screenshot, but if I go way down here, there's a thing called Apps. I can choose Planner there, add it. And then what this gives me is like a Planner hub view of my tasks and recent plans and so on. I've got you to be aware of is that this isn't exactly the same as Planner Hub. The only plans and activity that I see within Teams are from plans that are added to Teams. So if I've got another plan which isn't connected to anything on Microsoft Teams, it's not going to appear here. So it's not a full list, for example, of all my tasks that comes up. I think it's going to get better. So remember me saying that Microsoft has this integrated task vision that it's executing on, so that tasks that might come from Outlook or from SharePoint or from Microsoft Project, all appearing in one place. So at Ignite last autumn, they showed this view of Teams with the tasks app in the left-hand rail, and then it's showing personal tasks and tasks from Planner, and also ways that you can flip between boards and sort by priority and so on. This looks lovely. I can't wait to get my hands on it, but I am going to have to wait because it's not there yet. And then I can't do a webinar without mentioning SharePoint, because SharePoint is a big part of what we do at Clearbox. There's a number of ways in which Planner and SharePoint interact. So one is that if I go into a SharePoint site and click New, I can say New Plan, and it will be integrated with the whole of the SharePoint site. Or I can add it as web parts. So here's a page where, for example, I want to put my own heading and I might want to put a text box and things up front. But then I've added a web part for status and the one for the bucket view. So this gives me flexibility in the layout as well. The third kind of integration is the most fancy, and that is using Planner with what's called Power Automation now, but everybody still calls Flow because that's a lot catchier. So using Planner and Flow. And there's loads of different flows out there that will do things like creating planner tasks for emails received, a daily digest of plans. There's a flow for creating recurring plan a task every month or every week, loads of stuff out there. But based on what I've shown you so far, I wanted to show how Flow integrates Planner with that task management thing. So let me finally, one last time, go back into Chrome. What I've done is set up a form like this. So instead of creating the card directly, I've created Microsoft Forms where someone can describe the request, they can say if it's urgent, and they can say when it's required by. Behind this is a flow that's going to take that form, it's going to create a task in Planner, and it's also going to post a message that that's happened within the associated team site, which is here. As a last bit of wizardry, what I've done is take that form and added it to a SharePoint page. So now I can send people very easily to a place where they can go and request action from facilities. So please describe the request briefly. WASP in boardroom. Is this urgent? Not massively. When is it required by? Let me say, oops. 4th of March. Oops. I'm going to submit that form. And then I'm going to hope and pray because I don't do an awful lot of development. Let's see if that's gone through. Yes, it was submitted. So the flow should have executed. And now when I go to my facilities issue management, I have a card saying WASP in boardroom. Now I know you're all on mute, but in my head, you're all cheering rapturously at that having worked. And there we can see WASP in boardroom. It's been created. It's got a due date of the 4th of March and it's medium priority. It wasn't urgent. If we go over to Teams, we can also see there's an alert for the team saying WASP in boardroom has been created as a new request. I can't tell you how relieved I am that that worked as expected. Okay, so slides on that if you want to go back to it. Couple of limitations, well, a few limitations and frustrations that I found along the way living with Planner. The main one is that thing about creating a group and the SharePoint site and calendar and everything else that's kind of bundled with it. But it has an implication for security as well. So a group is basically a security setting saying that these 8 people have access to the plan. If I assign a task to someone who is outside that group, then Office 365, let's assume it's trying to be helpful, will give that external person access not just to the task, but to the entire group and maybe 3 years of documents that are stored on the SharePoint site that goes with it. So use it very carefully because assigning a task is actually changing permissions at the same time. Comments are very limited. One of the things I miss in Trello is that you can mention someone and they will get a notification with like a little red circle with a number in it saying you've got things to attend to. There's nothing that happens in Planner that's the same unless you've already commented and get a reply, and then it sends you an email, which I think is a bit messy. There's no way to import a list from Excel. So those product reaction cards that I showed you, those 100, I've got them in an Excel spreadsheet. I just had to type them all over again to create the cards. You can export to Excel, but it really isn't that usable. It's intended, for example, as an intermediary step to put it in something like Power BI so you can do visualizations on it. Number 6, if you've got a task and it has a file attached to it, for example, and you move it to another plan, which you can, it won't move the files across. Arguably, that file belongs to a group and you're moving it into a different group, so I can kind of get it, but it would be nice to have the option. You can't really search in a plan. If you go to filter, there is a search box, but the only thing that it searches on is the task name. It won't search for comments or details or anything else other than the task name. And you can only have one checklist and a maximum of 20 items. Sometimes it's nice to split it into 3 or 4 checklists that might depend on things that happen in different phases, but that's not possible. And for those of you who are asking how it compares with Trello, I think the big win with Planner is that it integrates your documents and security with Office 365. Trello, I found it's easier to get third-party participants into it for something like a workshop. So I only really use Planner in workshops if I'm working with a company that's already rolled out Teams and everybody's happily working within Teams. How to find out more? Well, there's some links. There's some good basics from Microsoft. I wrote a blog post on this that summarizes it as well, but we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm keen to get into the Q&A, and let me pop up my Q&A board, and maybe Wedge will come in and tell me if we've got anything
oh, yes.
come in. Uh-oh.
So quite a few questions. A very quick one to start you, Sam.
Yeah.
Kat asks, can you integrate the planner calendar thing into your personal Outlook calendar?
No. It's really annoying because although it's a group and it's a calendar, you can't integrate that calendar to anything else, including SharePoint calendars either.
Easy. Okay. Michelle asks, can you recover a card if you've accidentally deleted it? Can you recover a whole planner board if you've accidentally got rid of it?
So the card, if you delete it for a time, it will show it as deleted and you can undo it, but I'm not sure how long you've got to realize that.
Oh.
I believe if you delete a whole planner board, then it's gone for good, but I'd have to double check on that one.
Thank you there. Chris asks a general question. He's saying, for activities with a large number of tasks, would you create multiple planner tasks or a single task with a long list of mini tasks?
So if it makes sense for the state change to happen across all the mini tasks in your checklist, then I'd probably create one card. If the checklist of sub-actions would change the state, then I think it's probably best to split it up into moving between buckets to represent that big state change. I mean, it's a craft. There's no science to this, but the question is always, in order to manage this process, what visualizations will help me most? And the buckets are a strong visualization of the state of play, whereas the to-do list isn't a strong visualization. It's more like a smaller way of making sure that every step is done.
Okay. Fred asks, can you export the planner board as a sort of status dashboard without making every item public? So he's thinking about sending a status report to another department just so they can get an overview of what's been going on.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Let me just go into the demo environment if I can. What I'm thinking is that what's nice is on this, we've gone facilities request. Yeah, so it's dates and facilities. Somewhere in here I had, there we go. Yeah, so this is a SharePoint site, and on here I've got web parts that are pointing into the plan. And what I'm wondering is, can I give access to this page as something which is public without actually giving access to the detail of the plan of the task? I think that's what's been asked.
Oh yeah, that looks great.
Yeah. So this, rather than sending people PowerPoint files with the management status report, I would say, hey managers, here's a link to a page and we'll give you everything that you need. When I click on that.
I love that.
Yeah. So this is a public group. In the time available, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to figure it out, but let me get back to you. Was that Fred to ask that? Yeah, we'll get back to you on that, Fred, and do a test, because I think it's a really interesting question. We're nearly on the hour, Wedge, so is there a quick one we can do while I put up this blatant advert for our training workshops again?
Maybe it's quick. Hugo asks if there's any integration with OneNote. He suggests that you might do a checkbox in OneNote and that could create a task in Planner. That's a no, isn't it?
It's not that elegant. It's a bit more whole grained than that. So if I go into this, the meeting actions is quite a good example. So in the meeting, we might have a OneNote which is accessed as a notebook there, but it's a simple link, and it's going to, if it ever loads, it will take me into the OneNote as the whole thing. But if, for example, I'd got a new page, I'd have to, I won't demo it now. I'd have to do a right click on that page name, get a link, and then paste it back into the planner card. It's not that smart, unfortunately.
I'm quite grateful for that, because I think if people are heavy OneNote users, I think they'd be quite surprised if they were creating planner tasks every day.
Yes, yes, there is that too. Okay, Wedge, well, let me just tell people that if they like the sound of that SharePoint Intranets in a Box report, although it doesn't mention cheeses, it is a definitive guide to choosing things that sit on top of SharePoint and make them a usable intranet. With this code, Planner 101, when you go to clearbox.co.uk, you can get an extra 10% off as a thank you for joining this webinar. If you've got any other questions, or if you want to talk to us about any of the things that we've discussed or Clearbox do, please do drop us a line. We are at Clearbox on Twitter. We'll be pleased to hear from you at hello@clearbox.co.uk. Thank you very much indeed for joining this webinar, and thank you, Edge.